Trevor stood up and he said, "I'd just like to thank you half for not fucking the party this year." And there was absolute like silence, and you know, it just one of these moments that you don't know what reaction you're going to get. And at one point, you come along like a long corner, just, I mean, all absolutely flat in six. And all I hear is Richard goes, "Fuck." And we got to the end of the stage and Richard was really flapping. And I was like, "What happened?" And he said, "Did you not see?" I said, "No, I didn't see anything." And I mean, in a Group N 205, I mean, we were going through gates over cattle grids in the slush, flat in fourth gear. I mean, just a completely different driver. And as we crossed.
So, firstly, thanks very much, Robert, for doing this tonight. We know you're a busy man. I think it'd be quite fitting to have a few minutes on Mr. Mikula to start with.
Yeah.
For me, Hanu was God, and I was actually a bit crushed at the weekend when I heard the news. You know, it was like part of my childhood was gone. You know, I grew up adoring Hanu, but I only knew him as a competitor. You know, what were your views on him? I imagine you met him a few times.
Yeah, a few times. I didn't know him particularly well. I know Vesa quite well, one of his sons. Mm-hmm. And I obviously met Hanu quite a few times. Never, did I compete against him? I don't know. I mean, it would just be laterally if he was doing an event at that point. But my first kind of recollection of rallying at all, and the reason I got into it was, so my family's farming just between Dunkeld and Blairgowrie. And I was with Dad one day and we were up the A9, we had a farm up at Ballinluig, and we're coming back down and there was rally cars about Craigvinion, and I mean, I would probably be 8 or 9 years old. And the story goes that I pestered Dad and said, "Stop, want to go and have a look at this." So we walked into the forest a bit, and as I say, the story goes, I wouldn't leave until the last car had gone. And certainly that was Hanu and these guys in those days, Eton Yale, kind of early Mark II days. And then there was a friend of mine who was into rallying when I was growing up, and his nickname was Hanu, just for the very reasons that you say. You know, it was Hanu and Ari, I think, were the two that got most people excited about rallying.
So, what about yourself? What did you do after that then? Did you join a club, Robert, after you? I take it, I mean, that was classic rally country you obviously grew up in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm first generation motorsport. So I played a bit of rugby at school, played a bit of rugby after school, and 55 Car Club had their meetings in the rugby club in Perth. So it was kind of familiar territory. So I went along and joined 55 Car Club and took it from there. I think I've been a member of Glenrothes at some point, I'm sure. I was a member of Colton S at some point when I was co-driving with Robbie. So yeah, that was my my introduction. But of course, in those days, you know, especially living in the country, you know, you had to be 17, you had to have a driving license, you had to be able to get to things. Which is a bit different now. And there was my uncle who farmed as well. He had a farm manager that he took on, and I think this would be before I could drive, so probably when I was 15, 16. And I remember being at a social event at my uncle's place, and this guy was here, and somebody said, "Oh, this guy does a bit of rallying," and it's Alan Patterson. So I'm sure you all know Alan.
Yes.
So I kind of got talking to Alan, and Alan introduced me to Motorsport News, as it was at the time, in terms of publication, and that kind of sparked my interest a bit more, just in the sport. And then as soon as I could drive, then it was a case of, okay, you know, through Alan, you know, what's the local car club? 55, so became involved with them.
You remember doing your first ever rally with Alan? It was Aquarius that started the King's Kettle.
I can remember doing a few rallies with Alan. It was always a bit of an adventure.
I was speaking to Alan yesterday, and he gave me a wee story that it was a higher Vauxhall Corsa.
There was a few of them, yeah.
I've done 96 miles when you got it.
That sounds about right. I think there was Alan, in usual Alan fashion, had chatted up the girl who worked in the hire car company at the station in Perth. And we used to hire these Novas. We do some road rallies, some navigational events, and I think he'd gone back at one point saying that he wanted to hire a car, and the woman said to him, "That must be about the fourth time your granny's died and you've had to hire a car to go to the funeral."
What about your first stage event? Can you remember that, Robert?
Yes, I can. It was with it was Hackle. And it was with a guy called Alan Udney, who is sadly no longer with us. He was a member of 750 Car Club. And he was going to build an RS 2000 road car. And his plan was to make that into a Group 1 car and do the rally, do the Hackle with that. And he ran out of time. So he had a ladder, I can't remember what make of ladder, stuck a cage in it. And we did the Hackle in this ladder. So it wasn't exactly high speed, but it was okay downhill.
So how did you move on? I mean, I remember you sat beside Colin, didn't you, in an Escort in the Hackle?
Yeah, so I did. Yeah, when was that? 1990? Yeah. But before that, I did the usual thing that lots of people in those days did in the car club. You know, I did an Escort 1600 Sport, auto tested it, did some navigational events, did a couple of sprints, you know, all the usual stuff. Eventually stuck a cage in it and did some stage rallies with it. So I did a few stage events end of 85, beginning of 86. And I was actually looking at the other day, so the Granite, which was a national event in those days in 86, somebody actually sent me a link to it because I had a 19th quickest time in a 1600 Escort. Now Colin was doing the event as well. I can remember the piss up in the bar better afterwards than I can actually, you know, the event itself. But I think Colin was doing it in the Sunbeam, and he had a 19th quickest as well, was his best time. Ian Ray was navigating for me, was co-driving for me, and we went off in the middle of Clash in the snow into a ditch for 10 minutes or something. So that paid to a good result, and Colin had a couple of stage maximums as well. So neither of us had a result, but and then at the time I was at Edinburgh doing agriculture, so it's kind of balancing everything. It was quite hard to you know, have the finances and time and whatever to do that, and kind of realized that it wasn't going to work out. I was more interested and better at co-driving, navigating, than I was maybe at driving. So then 88, didn't do much. 87, I was actually assistant clerk of the course in the Hackle, I think in 87, just 55 Car Club stuff. 88 did with Robbie Head in the Nova, 88, 89. 90 did a load of stuff in Ireland with Stephen Price, John Price's son, in the Nova, and then did the Hackle with Colin towards the end of 90. I actually did the Hackle, and then 6 or 8 weeks later did the Galloway Hills with Alistair in the same car, and then I think 8 weeks or 10 weeks later did the first event I did with Richard, which was the Widing in the Peugeot. So within a space of certainly 3 months, I'd co-driven for all 3 of them.
What year was it you were with Richard, was that 1990 or 91?
91.
Did you compete against Richard in pugs at all?
Yeah, I did. So the end of 90, I think I'd kind of been doing the events with Stephen, and he was a decent enough driver, but not really as ambitious perhaps as I was. And I did a few events here, there, and everywhere. And I did the Audi Sport Rally with Steve Eggleston in the Peugeot. So, and that was the year when the Peugeot National Championship, as it were, and the International Championships were running side by side. So Richard was doing the National and Steve had been doing the International. So the Audi Sport was the event at the end of the year where they both came together. So we went down and we finished second on the event to Richard, who won it. And then, as all good things seem to happen in bars, got speaking to him in the bar afterwards and kept in touch from then, and then agreed to do stuff in 91 with him.
So what did you do in 91 and 92? Because you got the LNX drive, didn't you, Subaru? Was it the Group N Subaru in 92?
92. So 91 was Peugeot Championship. It was 13-round championship and we won it. Can't remember how many rounds, halfway through anyway. And then Des Adele had a Group N 16 valve 309 that was a bit of a development car. So we did a few events in that car. And then as our prize drive for winning the Peugeot Championship, we did REC in the 16 valve Group A car. I think we actually did, is it that year or the next year we did Audi Sport Rally in it as well? I can't remember. And then we also in 91, David Williams, who was a friend and kind of mentor for Richard, had bought or was interested in buying Group N Subaru from ProDrive. And we did a couple of development events with Martin Spurrell in that car. We did the Border that year. We did Cumbria as well. And then we, as I say, we did REC in the Group A Peugeot. And then the next year, 92, we did the National Championship in the Group N car and won that.
So 93, that was really the breakthrough, wasn't it? I mean, that was just practically a perfect season.
Yeah, apart from Ulster.
Yeah.
Which was in a bog early on in the first day. I don't know what happened there, it just didn't work at all. It was one of these things that anything that could have gone wrong that week did. I think recce car broke down, everything happened, went off the road. But yeah, it was good. I mean, Alistair was our teammate. It was only 5 rounds in British Championship that year, I think. So we won 4, didn't finish one of them, and then did the GB that year, which was pretty snowy. And I think we finished 10th in GB.
Did you see something in Richard at the very start to realise that he was going? Was he aspiring to get to the very top?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's what he lived for. I mean, he was absolutely dedicated towards it. Pretty, I was going to say socially awkward. I mean, he got much better, but when I first met him, I mean, he was 19 when I first did a rally with him, and didn't drink, didn't go out, worked on his rally car all the time. That's all he wanted to do. And we did, so Wydene was the first round down in Forest of Dean, and it was snowy. On the first stage, I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's circular. So you go up the entry road and exit road's the same. You kind of go around a big stage around the hill. And we came off the stage and we were, I don't know, 2nd, 3rd, 4th Peugeot or something. And there were some good guys, Julian Reynolds, Steve Bennett, some of these guys were doing it at the time. And it was a short road section there to the next stage. and nothing much was said for the first mile or two. And then he said, "How did you think that went?" And I was like, "Yeah, it was okay, nothing special." So we went into the next stage, and he was very, very fired up. And we caught Brendan Creeley 3-4 miles into the stage. Roy Campbell still goes on about it. Roy was with Brendan. He still goes on about it, yeah. And I mean, in a Group N 205, I mean, we're going through gates over cattle grids in the slush, flat in fourth gear. I mean, just a completely different driver. And as we crossed the flying finish to the next stage, he said, "Was that better then?"
Just a bit. What was Brendan? Was Brendan in the Toyota?
No, Brendan was in the Peugeot at the time.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
What was it? 95 REC? Was that the big turning point? I mean, was it third place?
Yeah, third. I mean, that was, obviously Colin winning the championship, Carlos second, us third. Yeah, I think it was probably one of the turning points. I mean, it's tough, and you see it repeated. You look at somebody like Elvin even now, is probably the best example at the moment. It takes a while to get the experience, not just of the events, but generally in the confidence to push as hard as these guys are pushing. I can't remember when our first fastest time, because we obviously 93 was UK, and then we did Thailand at the end of that year, Asia Pacific. 94 was Asia Pacific, and then 95 we did Portugal. I can't remember what else, maybe Greece or something that year as well. But the Asia Pacific at the time included Australia and New Zealand. So that was actually a really good way of getting experience of those events as well. So we probably had moments where we had top 3 times, maybe a fastest time by the end of 95. But yeah, I think GB 94 GB, we were third quickest in Hamsterley, and then took a wheel off in Shepherd Shield in the next stage. So there was lots of that going on. That just trying to find a pace you could live at without making mistakes.
Well, you moved to Mitsubishi in 96.
Yeah.
After such a great result on the REC. Was this for a better programme?
No. ProDrive said they didn't want us. We had we had an option on the third year. So at the end of 93, we signed a 2+1. And we they didn't want us, so they'd taken Kenneth Eriksson. And it was really quite awkward because as we came out of the debrief of the end of that event, which was quite short because Colin was desperate to get on the beers, we were walking out the debrief in the hotel. So Richard, myself, Carlos, Lewis, Colin and Derek, and Kenneth and Staffan were walking in because that was them about to have their first meeting with the team. So it was a bit strange.
It must have been a culture shock, this going to the Asia Pacific Championship, though, compared to like the Harkle a few years earlier.
Yeah, it was.
It was organisation and stuff in these events.
Hellish, like really bad. I mean, we had a couple of. I got hauled in front of the stewards in one event. I can't remember, it was Malaysia where it was. For the charge was for supposedly calling a senior official a cow, and actually what it was we got to in a stage there was a load of cows on the road. So we got to the end of the stage and we were trying to explain to them that they need to do something because there's a herd of cows on the road. And this official took offence and thought I was calling him a cow. So got hauled in front of the stewards for it. So yeah, I mean, it was vehicles coming towards you. I mean, much worse than any Scottish Championship event in terms of organisation. We had one stage in Thailand, I can't remember what year it was, but we said to the event organisers, that stage is too fast. And it was along a banking when you had a canal one side and paddy fields the other side. And it was 10 kilometres long. And at that time, I think 132 kilometers an hour was in the regulations as being the maximum average speed that a stage could be. And we said, you know, there's no way we're below that. And they said, oh, in national events has been fine. The fastest has been 115 average or whatever it was. So we did the stage. We were never out of top gear the whole time, out of sixth the whole time. I can't, it was like 3 minutes, 15 seconds or something for 10Ks. It was 176 or 178 average in kilometers. And at one point, you come along like a long corner, just, I mean, all absolutely flat in sixth. And it just opened out slightly and it dipped down onto a bridge and then up the other side. So it was all flat, but it was going to be a big jump. And we came along there and I had my head down and all I hear is Richard goes, fuck. So I'm like looking up, don't see anything. We land in the middle of the bridge and it's one of these ones that, you know, has got like stone sides to it, there are stone railings along. So we take off and we land halfway along the bridge or something in between the stone railings. And it was quite narrow, but wide enough, it was not really a risk. And we got to the end of the stage and Richard was really flapping. And I was like, what happened? And he said, did you not see? I said, no, I didn't see anything. And there was a Thai guy cycling his push bike on the bridge coming towards us as we came round 180 clicks or whatever it was and jumped. And Richard had no idea whether we went over the top of him, whether he fell off his bike going to the side, whether we'd landed on him and obliterated him or anything.
But you kept going anyway.
Yeah.
Excellent. How did that the Mitsubishi compare with the previous season Subaru?
It was difficult. So the Mitsubishi used a Sprague center diff. So the Subaru was basically almost lock center diff, lock rear diff. So it was like a rear wheel drive car, basically to drive. It was, you had to chuck it in and, you know, you could steer it on the throttle, no problem. Whereas the Mitsubishi had a clutch center diff. So as soon as you came off the power, the center diff disengaged. So if you tried to balance the car through the corner with a bit of throttle, you were, you know, four-wheel, two-wheel, four-wheel, two-wheel, four-wheel, two-wheel, all the way through. Now, Tommy used to work, I'm trying to think how it used to work. Tommy used to work the center diff control on boost. So if you kept it, when the boost was above a certain pressure, you got full lock on the center diff. Whereas Richard wanted to drive the car on the throttle a bit more, so he preferred it on throttle position. But Tommy drove, you know, like throttle was a switch. So for him, it was fine because it was locked all the time. And we played a lot with diff ramps and, you know, plates and all the rest, trying to get it the way we liked it. But, you know, you could never really get it 100%. And it was so unique. I remember when Alistair went to Mitsubishi and Richard saying to Alistair, you'll never believe how tricky it is to set up. And Alistair's like, how do you mean? He said, well, if the car's oversteering too much, you need to put a bigger rear bar on. And that, for those of you who understand, I see Alan there shaking his head. For those of you that understand, you know, car dynamics and mechanics, normally if it was oversteering, you put a softer rear bar on, pick up more grip at the rear. But what was happening is you had to put a harder rear bar on because it was coming from the fact that it was lifting a front wheel. So as soon as it lifted a front wheel, you used to lose the front drive because of the clutch center diff. And Alistair was like, oh, Burnsy, you're taking the piss. You know, that can't be how it works. And then I remember him coming to us pretty sheepishly after a couple of events going, I cannot work this thing out. You know, it just is absolutely reverse from what you think logically you would do. So that was pretty challenging. just in terms of, and then, you know, you're in, and it's happened to people, I suppose, in teams with us, but, you know, it was Tommy's team. All the engineering stuff was led by what Tommy wanted. I mean, we actually had a situation, I remember, in Finland where and I can't remember what it was, but there's a particular setting or dampers or something that we wanted to go with. And the guy who, Lassie Lampe, who kind of managed Tommy, as it were, and all the engineering stuff, Lassie came to us and he said, I know the choice that you've taken on dampers is the fastest one, but if you take it, Tommy will want to take it, and it's not right for Tommy, so you can't have it. So we had to take a setup so that it didn't upset their plans for what Tommy wanted to take.
How was the relationship with Tommy?
Good. We tested his patience a few times. Remember in Kenya, we had an accident on the recce. We were flat out on a road section, and there was a truck in front of us, and we pulled out to overtake the truck, and the truck wandered across the road. So we went kind of down the bank in a bit, and there was a concrete bridge coming in. So we hit the side of the bridge, spun down the road, and the wheels were off it and all the rest. So Tommy came along, and he'd finished for the day, and he said, oh, you just take my recce car. And we then took his recce car to have one last run through this section, got to the hotel place we were staying. Tommy was going out for a run, and we'd hit something with one of the rear doors and had to tie wrap it shut. And just as we're pulling in and Tommy's going out for a run, the tie wraps break and the rear door like flies open. And the look in Tommy's face, he was just like, you prats.
Talking of working relationships, how was Andrew Cowan to work for? Was he
good? Yeah, Andrew was good. He was, yeah, he was. How would you sum up Andrew? He's quite Scottish farmery in his approach. So being the son of a Scottish farmer, I think I could kind of work out where he was coming from a lot of the time. Yeah, no, he was good. He was good. He phoned Richard. I remember Richard phoned me in my room, and it must have been the first year we did Finland, so 98. So we'd done the recce a few times, and Richard phones me up like the night before. I think we'd done the super special and then gone back to the hotel. So he phones me in my room at 10 o'clock. He says, you'll never guess what Andrew's just said. I'm like, go on, what's he said? He said, he's phoned me up. He said, I've only got one bit of advice for you. He said, over these blind crests, point it at the trees. and Richard was like, I have no idea what he was talking about. I have no idea what he's trying to say. He said, but believe me, I'm not going to point it at the trees. But I think it was more, you know, get it turned in. So I kind of half got what he'd said.
So your first win in Africa, was it in 98?
23 years ago today.
How long?
23 years ago today.
Can you believe that?
I read on Twitter just before coming on here.
How was that for you? I mean, must have been incredible.
Yeah.
The journey.
Kenya is an amazing place. We went to Kenya 94, 95 with Group N cars with, there's a guy, Kiseki, who ran he was kind of the Subaru boss, and he ran a Group N program in Kenya. We led the event outright in 95 with Group N car. It's an amazing rally, particularly at that time. It really is special. In those days, it was basically a road rally. So you had no arrival control or stage start control or flying finish control. You just had controls. So you would, at the start, and you had 3 different classifications of section. So you had a road section. I think that the next that they called a semi-competitive, and then a competitive. And at that point, you didn't get stage time. So it was all whether you dropped whole minutes. So exactly as you'd run a road rally.
Mm-hmm.
So the road sections were timed, I don't know, at 50k average or something. The semi-competitives would maybe be, I don't know, 70 or 80k average. And then the competitives would be 120 average. But I remember when we were in the Group N car, I think the first year we were there, Didier was doing it at Toyota. And there was one section we started on the same minute as Didier. So he'd had problems and we started on the same minute. So literally we're sat side by side at the control and the marshal would come and basically throw your card in the car when the minute came up, and that was you go. So we're sat there and he throws the card in and we didn't even bother leaving the line. We just let the Toyota go for 30 seconds and then went offline afterwards. And what it also meant is at the end of the sections, you used to always time it. So dust is a massive problem. So what you had to do is you had to open your door and put your card on the roof. And that's where any passage controls or the finish control, that's where the catcher would take your card from. So if you were coming in and you just passed the start of a minute, you just slow down and drive in really slowly, keep your door shut, open your door, give your card, because you'd still get the same minute. But if you were struggling or you're getting towards the end of a minute, you'd come in with, 4 wheels locked up on the brakes, one hand holding the door shut and the other trying to get the card out to give it, because it was when that guy had the card in his hand was the time that you got. And for me in those days, that was brilliant. That was a fantastic event. Then 96, they changed it and they had special stages. So you actually had arrival controls and stage starts and flying finishes.
All right.
And it was timed to the second. I think it was probably still when we won in 98. So we were second in 97. We were second in 97, I think, and won it in 98. And we were still timed to the second at that point, and then they went to a 10th afterwards, which for me isn't the point of the event. It's an endurance event. It's a long event. It's not about tenths of a second, but they wanted to homogenize it and make it the same as everything. So yeah, I mean, long event, and ideally your car would completely expire as you cross the finish line of the last stage. I mean, it was all about just taking as much out of the car, but still keeping going. I mean, some of them, I'm sure you've all seen the pictures. I mean, some of the kind of the rockeries that you'd have to drive up. I mean, literally, it's the sort of thing, if you went along with a new Land Rover Defender, you think twice about going up it. And here's us going up in rally cars. And the other funny thing, we had Safari Rally is probably the one rally that most people who've done it have got the most stories about. We used to practice in Group A cars, so practiced in full cars. So the way they used to work it is last year's event car was the next year's recce car. And a Safari recce car is the most disgusting, smelly, horrible thing you can imagine in your life. You spent, 3 weeks in this thing, in the heat and the dust and everything. And there's all these people going, "Oh, I bought an ex-Safari recce car." I'm like, no chance, man, no chance.
It sounds like that was perhaps your favourite event in the WRC, Robert. No?
Yeah, it was certainly one of them. It was certainly one of them. I mean, I think New Zealand, fantastic. Partly because it's kind of a bit like Scotland. It's far away. The long haul events were always more fun. The first year, so 94, when we did New Zealand, I flew out with Colin, because Derek didn't want to do the test. We had 3 days to acclimatise when we got there. We did 4 days testing. Then Possum did 3 days testing. Then Richard did 3 days testing. So I did that test with Richard. Then we had, I think, 2 or 3 days between the test and the recce. The recce was 14 days. We had 2 days between the recce and the rally was 4 days. Now, compare that to now. You do the recce, you know, Tuesday, Wednesday, shakedown Thursday, rally Friday, Saturday, and half a Sunday.
Yeah.
You know, but we were doing, I mean, it was probably 500 kilometers special stages at that point. So I would say Safari, yes, New Zealand, GB, just because of what it is, your home rally is always a good one. Finland, amazing event, and Sweden. Sweden, just because, you know, you're driving on obviously snow and ice with studded tires that when you get out to go for a pee, you land on your arse because it's so slippy, and yet you're doing whatever speed it is on, you know, on the stages. It's really quite hard to get your head around what's actually happening. And I think that the only thing when we were competing, I think the advantage we had is we had more testing for the specific event. So New Zealand, for example, that year did it with Colin. We hadn't been out, but Colin had been testing in New Zealand beforehand as well, and then flown back to do something else, and then gone out again to do the pre-event test. But the ability to do your test, know what you wanted, but then to do a pre-event test a couple of days before the recce, just got your head back into the right groove. So if it was for Sweden, it was understanding the surface. If it was Finland, you know, it was understanding the speed again. So it was good just before you made your notes, just to get your head in the right place.
I remember in the Group B days, they used to be away for something like 300 days a year. Well, what kind of numbers were you?
The most we ever had was 286 one year. So in 99, I think it was 286. No, wow. So that was development testing, event testing, events, promotion. You know, you work for a Japanese manufacturer, you're in Japan 3 times a year.
Yeah.
For promotional stuff. So yeah, it was 286.
So you moved from Mitsubishi. Why did you leave them to go back to Subaru? And also, am I right in thinking you replaced Colin? And was that quite daunting? Given he was.
No, I don't think it was daunting. I mean, I remember in we went for dinner. It would be unusual if Richard and I and Colin and Derek at the time, or Colin and Nicky, didn't go for dinner at least once during an event, during the recce. So we went for dinner with Colin. I remember it was in Argentina, 98 it must have been. And we sat down and Colin's like, so what's happening, Burnsy? And Richard's like, well, you tell me, Colin, what's happening? And it was this kind of Mexican standoff in Argentina, where nobody would really put their cards on the table. And eventually Burnsy said, right, I've got an offer from Subaru. What are you doing? And Colin's like, I'm going to Ford. And Richard's like, right, I'll take the Subaru offer then. So, yeah, it was, I think the Mitsubishi was difficult. It was definitely Tommy's team. So the opportunity to go into an environment that we had the chance to shape the team around us was you know, the opportunity that you were all looking for. We spoke to Toyota as well for that year, and we had a bit of a conversation early on with Ford, but you know, obviously Colin was heading there.
Your teammate was it Kankinen that year in the Subaru, your first
Yeah,
year?
Kankinen and Bruno Thierry.
How was Juha?
Juha's great. Yeah, he's laid back. I mean, I'm famously quoted that year as saying, wherever there's a fin, there's a shark. So he wasn't adverse to trying to use some dodgy tactics, as he proved in Argentina that year.
Remind us.
We led and had an engine problem last morning, and DR said, look, we're going to turn the engine down. Your win is protected. Juha was second and everybody else was miles behind. Juha's not going to challenge you. I want you to make sure you get this car home. So, you know, you've really got to look after the engine. And Juha decided that that was his opportunity. And the last stage of the event, we weren't driving like we had an engine problem. And the whole stage, I was thinking this thing's just going to go bang any moment. And Juha, Steve Turvey, I don't know if any of you know Steve Turvey, works for the promoter now, but Steve and Robbie Head were they were our gravel crew, and they were in the end of the last stage, and it had all been pre-arranged, and it had been pre-arranged with Juha. Juha knew where they were going to be. They were going to tell Juha whether he was, you know, right or not in terms of the team orders. And Turvey's a big lad, and Juha nearly ran him down, and swears to this day he never saw him. And so Juha won. Juha offered to reverse the places after the last stage, but you know, he won by that point. So, but the funny thing was, the next year, Juha was still in the team, and we won Argentina the next year, and we're at the team meal afterwards, and we were just having a few speeches and whatever, and it came to me, and I said I'd like to ask Steve Turvey to say a few words on my behalf, and Turv stood up and he said, I'd just like to thank Juha for not fucking the party this year. And there was absolute like silence, and you know, it just one of these moments that you don't know what reaction you're going to get, and then eventually Juha Repo started laughing and like toasted us or whatever. So
it's funny you mentioned where there's a fin, there's a shark. I remember reading about the fins in the early 80s. They blocked in Russell Brooks from getting to the time control. They kind of look out for each other, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, 2000, was it 2000 that you had your big crash in Finland?
Yeah.
That was a monster, wasn't it?
We would have won the championship if it wasn't for that. That was
a bad note.
A lot of people say, you know, what do you regret? Generally, I don't regret anything. You know, I'm quite happy with the decision at the time. I think to chase Marcus for the win with hindsight was the wrong thing to do. And it was actually quite a funny story. So we went off after the flying finish. So it was on this big long corner and flat out. I think it was 6th down to 5th for the corner. So we went off and we had this big accident, and I'm radioing Simon Cole, our engineer. I'm like, he used to go call Crikey, his nickname. I'm like, Crikey, we've gone off the road, we've crashed. And he's like, yeah, I've got your stage time. Just give me a shout back when you get a bit further down the road. Stop and have a look. When you do your tire pressure, stop and let me know what your tires. I'm like, no, we've crashed. No, I've got your stage time. And I think we're just taking the lead actually with that stage time. And I'm like, no, we've crashed. We're off the road. We're in the trees. It's destroyed. We're not going any further. He's like, but I've got your stage time. I said, yes. We crashed after the flying finish. And it was a job just getting them to to actually understand, you know, what happened.
Yeah. But, am I right in thinking your pace notes are very detailed, Robert,
Yeah,
compared to others?
yeah. Richard had 28 severities of corner.
28.
28.
Bloody hell.
Yeah.
What's the standard? 10, 8?
I mean,
Aye.
very simple would be 6 with a few pluses and minuses. I think Colin had 6, and he used plus and minus not on all of them. So, yeah, 12 maybe, 14.
Must have been hard work for you.
It was, and that's why, you know, most people think I've got an orange stripe up the top of my head, because that's all you used to see in the car. Just because it was all head down all the time.
Robert, do you think navigators are kind of undervalued, especially in the press, the media, the speciality press actually? They don't seem to give the navigators the recognition they deserve.
I was going to say,
At the weekend there, Solberg got all the plaudits, but there was no mention of Seb Marshall, for example.
Yeah, no, I must admit I was a little bit surprised that, even a little bit surprised that Oliver hadn't mentioned him more.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel like that when you were competing? Were you disgruntled by that at all?
No, I wasn't. And I think in Richard and I's situation, we understood each other's strengths, and we were quite different as people. So I don't think we clashed. You know, I wouldn't particularly push myself in front of the cameras, but there would be times when Richard would say, "Can you go and speak to so-and-so?" And I think that's very important. And I think where perhaps Colin and Nicky at one point weren't getting on, I think, you know, Nicky was quite keen to get in front of the cameras, and Colin maybe didn't like that so much. So I think it's a balance of how you work together, and you've got to get to that point. You know, you start off as mates. You go through a period of absolutely hating each other because you're spending 286 days together in a year, and then you get this, you know, massive mutual respect, and that's the point you need to get to in terms of that partnership, when you don't actually need to say very much because you both know what the score is anyway. Different co-drivers, you know, have different roles. I mean, I did all the tests. I think there's 3 or 4 tests I didn't do my whole career, because for Richard, he wanted me to do the test because at the end of the day, there was only 2 of us in the car on the event. And he would often say, remember when we did the test, we used 3 dampers. The middle one, what were my comments on that middle one? So, you know, or be able to say, you know, what do you think, you know, how do you think the car's handling? What do you think the engine feels like? So kind of, you know, it was a real partnership in the car. Other co-drivers did no testing, and engineers would sit in the car. So, you know, it's very different levels of engagement. I think also the job has changed massively. So what attracted me to co-driving initially, probably the least attractive part was sitting in the car. So the planning, the scheduling, the tires, the managing the weather crews, managing all the information, understanding the regulations, managing the radio, you know, things like we talked about Safari. Richard couldn't hear the helicopter in Safari because he didn't want to hear it. So I did. I read the pace notes. I managed all the communication to the helicopter. I did all the timing. I did all the fuel. Nowadays, when you've got centralized servicing, team does the tires, team does the fuel. So the role is actually quite different.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't really answer your question. You know, I think, you know, there's 2 people in the car. That's a unique selling point of the sport, and I think both of those people should get recognition for for the parts that they play.
Here, here.